Khalil the Heretic, Part 3. On the north side of that village, in the midst of the wind-torn fields, stood the solitary home of a woman named Rachel and her daughter Miriam, who had not then attained the age of 18. Rachel was the widow of Simon Rami, who was found slain 6 years earlier, but the law of man did not find the murderer. Like the rest of the Lebanese widows, Rachel sustained life through long, hard work. During the harvest season, she would look for ears of corn left behind by others in the fields, and in autumn, she gathered the remnants of some forgotten fruits in the gardens. In winter, she spun wool and made raiment for which she received a few piastres, or a bushel of grain. Miriam, her daughter, was a beautiful girl who shared with her mother the burden of toil. That bitter night, the two women were sitting by the fireplace, whose warmth was weakened by the frost, and whose firebrands were buried beneath the ashes. By their side was a flickering lamp that sent its yellow, dimmed rays into the heart of darkness like a prayer that sends phantoms of hope into the hearts of the sorrowful. Midnight had come, and they were listening to the wailing winds outside. Every now and then Miriam would get up and open the small transom and look toward the obscured sky, and then she would return to her chair, worried and frightened by the raging elements. Suddenly, Miriam started, as if she had awakened from a swoon of deep slumber. She looked anxiously toward her mother and said, "Did you hear that, mother? Did you hear a voice calling for help?" The mother listened a moment and said, "I hear nothing except the crying wind, my daughter." Then Miriam exclaimed, "I heard a voice deeper than the thundering heaven, and more sorrowful than the wailing of the tempest." Having uttered these words, she stood up and opened the door and listened for a moment. Then she said, "I hear it again, mother." Rachel hurried toward the frail door, and after a moment's hesitation, she said, "And I hear it too. Let us go and see." She wrapped herself up with a long robe, opened the door, and walked out cautiously, while Miriam stood at the door, the wind blowing her long hair. Having forced her way a short distance through the snow, Rachel stopped and shouted out, "Who is calling? Where are you?" There was no answer. Then she repeated the same words again and again, but she heard naught except thunder. Then she courageously advanced forward, looking in every direction. She had walked for some time when she found some deep footprints upon the snow. She followed them fearfully, and in a few moments found a human body lying before her on the snow, like a patch on a white dress. As she approached him and leaned his head over her knees, she felt his pulse that bespoke his slowing heartbeats and his slim chances in life. She turned her face toward the hut and called, "Come, Miriam, come and help him. Come and help me. I found him." Miriam rushed out and followed her mother's footprints, while shivering with cold and trembling with fear. As she reached the place and saw the youth lying motionless, she cried with an aching voice. The mother put her hands under his armpits, calmed Miriam, and said, "Fear not, for he is still living. Hold the lower edge of his cloak, and let us carry him home." Confronted with the strong wind and heavy snow, the two women carried the youth and started toward the hut. As they reached the little haven, they laid him down by the fireplace. Rachel commenced rubbing his numbed hands, and Miriam drying his hair with the end of her dress. The youth began to move after a few minutes. His eyelids quivered, and he took a deep sigh, a sigh that brought the hope of his safety into the hearts of the merciful women. They removed his shoes and took off his black robe. Miriam looked at her mother and said, "Observe his raiment, mother. These clothes are worn by the monks." After feeding the fire with a bundle of dry sticks, Rachel looked at her daughter with perplexity and said, "The monks do not leave their convent on such a terrible night." And Miriam inquired, "But he has no hair on his face, and the monks wear beards." The mother gazed at him with eyes full of mercy and maternal love. Then she turned to her daughter and said, "It makes no difference whether he is a monk or criminal. Dry his feet well, my daughter." Rachel opened a closet, took from it a jar of wine, and poured some in an earthenware bowl. And remember that in Christianity, that the trimming of the beard is not allowed in biblical Christianity. Miriam held his head, while the mother gave him some of it to stimulate his heart. As he sipped the wine, he opened his eyes for the first time and gave his rescuers a sorrowful look mingled with tears of gratitude, the look of a human who felt the smooth touch of life after having been gripped in the sharp claws of death, a look of great hope after hope had died. Then he bent his head, and his lips trembled when he uttered the words, "May God bless both of you." Rachel placed her hand upon his shoulder and said, "Be calm, brother. Do not tire yourself with talking until you gain strength." And Miriam added, "Rest your head on this pillow, brother, and we will place you closer to the fire." Rachel refilled the bowl with wine and gave it to him. She looked at her daughter and said, "Hang his robe by the fire so it will be dry." Having executed her mother's command, she returned and commenced looking at him mercifully, as if she wanted to help him by pouring into his heart all the warmth of her soul. Rachel brought 2 loaves of bread with some preserves and dry fruits. She sat by him and began to feed him small morsels, as a mother feeds her little child. At this time he felt stronger and sat up on the hearth mat, while the red flames of fire reflected upon his sad face. His eyes brightened, and he shook his head slowly, saying, "Mercy and cruelty are both wrestling in the human heart, like the mad elements in the sky of this terrible night. But mercy shall overcome cruelty, because it is divine, and the terror alone of this night shall pass away when daylight comes." Silence prevailed for a minute, and then he added with a whispering voice, "A human hand drove me into desperation, and a human hand rescued me. How severe man is, and how merciful man is." And Rachel inquired, "How ventured you, brother, to leave the convent on such a terrible night, when even the beasts do not venture forth?" The youth shut his eyes as if he wanted to restore his tears back in the depth of his heart whence they came. And he said, "The animals have their caves, and the birds of the sky have their nests, but the Son of Man has no place to rest his head." Rachel retorted, "That is what Jesus said about himself." And the young man resumed, "This is the answer for every man who wants to follow the Spirit and the truth in this age of falsehood, hypocrisy, and corruption." After a few moments' contemplation, Rachel said, "But there are many comfortable rooms in the convent, and the coffers are full of gold and all kinds of provisions. The sheds of the convent are stocked with fat calves and sheep. What made you leave such haven in this deathly night?" The youth sighed deeply and said, "I left that place because I hated it." And Rachel rejoined, "A monk in a convent is like a soldier in the battlefield, who is required to obey the orders of his leader regardless of their nature. I heard that a man could not become a monk unless he did away with his will, and his thought, his desires, and all that pertains to the mind. But a good head priest does not ask his monks to do unreasonable things. How could the head priest of Dar Kashaya ask you to give up your life to the storms and snow? And you're marked. In the opinion of the head priest, a man cannot become a monk unless he is blind and ignorant, senseless and dumb. I left the convent because I am a sensible man who can see, feel, and hear. Miriam and Rachel stared at him as if they had found in his face a hidden secret. After a moment of meditation, the mother said, "Will a man who sees and hears go out on a night that blinds the eyes and deafens the ears?" And the youth stated quietly, "I was expelled from the convent." "Expelled," exclaimed Rachel, and Miriam repeated the same word in unison with her mother. He lifted his head, regretting his words, for he was afraid lest their love and sympathy be converted into hatred and disrespect. But when he looked at them, he found rays of mercy still emanating from their eyes and their bodies vibrating with anxiety to learn further. His voice choked, and he continued, "Yes, I was expelled from the convent because I could not dig my grave with my own hands, and my heart grew weary of lying and pilfering. I was expelled from the convent because my soul refused to enjoy the bounty of a people who surrendered themselves to ignorance. I was driven away because I could not find rest in the comfortable rooms built with the money of the poor fellahin. My stomach could not hold bread baked with the tears of orphans. My lips could not utter prayers sold for gold and food by the heads to the simple and faithful people. I was expelled from the convent like a filthy leper because I was repeating to the monks the rules that qualified them to their present position." Silence prevailed while Rachel and Miriam were contemplating his words and gazing at him. When they asked, "Are your father and mother living?" And he responded, "I have no father or mother, nor a place that is my home." Rachel drew a deep sigh, and Miriam turned her face toward the wall to hide her merciful and loving tears. As a withering flower is brought back to life by dewdrops that dawn pours into its begging petals, so the youth's anxious heart was enlivened by his benefactor's affection and kindness. He looked at them as a soldier looks upon his liberators who rescue him from the grip of the enemy, and he resumed, "I lost my parents before I reached the age of 7. The village priest took me to Der Kishaya and left me to the disposal of the monks, who were happy to take me in and put me in charge of the cows and sheep, which I led each day to the pasture. When I attained the age of 15, they put on me this black robe and led me into the altar, whereupon the head priest addressed me, saying, 'Swear by the name of God and all the saints, and make a vow to live a virtuous life of poverty and obedience.' I repeated the words before I realized their significance or comprehended their own interpretation of poverty, virtue, and obedience." Yeah, being a professional priest that's richer than everybody around. Well, not everybody, but pretty close. Now, I don't know where the 15 thing came for them, but in Islamic society, based on the example of Prophet Muhammad, a male was not given his full rights till he was 15 and having hit puberty. The name, his full rights as an adult versus a child. you get your full rights for whatever stage you're at, but you know what I mean. My name was Khalil, and since that time the monks addressed me as Brother Mubarak, but they never did treat me as a brother. Consequently, Mubarak was the name of the Right Reverend Mary Knight Archbishop who officiated at Khalil Gibran's last rites. They ate the most palatable foods and drank the finest wine, while I lived on dry vegetables and water, mixed with tears. I still think Khalil Gibran sounds closer to Baha'i in what he was conveying, but they slumbered in soft beds while I slept on a stone slab in a dark and cold room by the shed. Oftentimes I ask myself, when will I become a monk and share with those fortunate priests in their bounty? When will my heart stop craving for food they eat and the wine they drink? When will I cease to tremble with fear before my superior? But all my hopes were in vain, for I was kept in the same state. In addition to caring for the cattle, I was obliged to move heavy stones on my shoulders and to dig pits and ditches. I sustained life on a few morsels of bread given to me in reward for my toil. I knew of no other place to which I might go, and the clergymen at the convent caused me to abhor everything they were doing. They had poisoned my mind until I commenced to think that the whole world was an ocean of sorrows and miseries, and that the convent was the only port of salvation. When I discovered the source of their food and gold, I was happy that I did not share it. Khalil straightened himself and looked about with wonder, as if I had found something beautiful standing before him. In that wretched hut, Rachel and Miriam remained silent, and he proceeded. God, who took my father and exiled me as an orphan to the convent, did not want me to spend all my life walking blindly toward a dangerous jungle, nor did he wish me to be a miserable slave. For the rest of my life, God opened my eyes and ears and showed me the bright light and made me hear truth when truth was talking. Rachel thought aloud, is there any light other than the sun that shines over all the people? Are human beings capable of understanding the truth? Khalil returned, the true light is that which emanates from within man and reveals the secrets of the heart to the soul, making it happy and contented with life. Truth is like the stars. It does not appear except from behind obscurity of the night. Truth is like all beautiful things in the world. It does not disclose its desirability except to those who first feel the influence of falsehood. Truth is a deep kindness that teaches us to be content in our everyday life and share with the people the same happiness. Rachel replied, many are those who live according to their goodness, and many are those who believe that compassion to others is the shadow of the law of God to man. But still they do not rejoice in life, for they remain miserable until death. Khalil replied, vain are the beliefs and teachings that make man miserable, and false is the goodness that leads him into sorrow and despair. For it is man's purpose to be happy on this earth, and lead the way to felicity and preach its gospel wherever he goes. He who does not see the kingdom of heaven in this life will never see it in the coming life. We came not into this life by exile, but we came as innocent creatures of God to learn how to worship the Holy and Eternal Spirit. and seek the hidden secrets within ourselves from the beauty of life. This is the truth which I have learned from the teachings of the Nazarene. This is the light that came from within me and showed me the dark corners of the convent that threatened my life. This is the deep secret which the beautiful valleys and fields revealed to me when I was hungry, sitting, lonely, and weeping under the shadow of the trees. This is the religion as the convent should impart it, as God wished it, as Jesus taught it. One day, as my soul became intoxicated with the heavenly intoxication of truth's beauty, I stood bravely before the monks who were gathering in the garden and criticized their wrong deeds, saying, "Why do you spend your days here and enjoy the bounty of the poor, whose bread you eat was made with the sweat of their bodies and the tears of their hearts? Why are you living in the shadow of parasitism, segregating yourselves from the people who are in need of knowledge? Why are you depriving the country of your help? Jesus has sent you as lambs amongst the wolves. What has made you as wolves amongst the lambs? Why are you fleeing from mankind and from God who created you? If you are better than the people who walk in the procession of life, you should go to them and better their lives. But if you think they are better than you should desire to learn from them. How do you take an oath and vow to live in poverty, then forget what you have said and live in luxury? How do you swear an obedience to God and then revolt against all that religion means? How do you adopt virtue as your rule when your heart is full of lusts? You pretend that you are killing your bodies, but in fact you are killing your souls. You feign to abhor the earthly things, but your heart is swollen with greed. You have the people believe in you as a religious teacher. Truly speaking, you are like busy cattle who divert themselves from knowledge by grazing in a green and beautiful pasture. Let us restore to the needy the vast land of the convent and give back to them the silver and gold we took from them. Let us disperse from our aloofness and serve the weak who made us strong and cleanse the country in which we live. Let us teach this miserable nation to smile and rejoice with heaven's bounty and glory of life and freedom. People's tears are more than beautiful and God joined than the ease and tranquility to which you have accustomed yourselves in this place. The sympathy that touches the neighbor's heart is more supreme than the hidden virtue in the unseen corners of the convent. A word of compassion to the weak criminal or prostitute is nobler than the long prayer which we repeat emptily every day in the temple. Now, emptily is the key there. And in other cases, you actually have forms that God has revealed. Remember how the Bible talks about prayer. Prayer is not just saying what you want. The word for prayer, salah, you make particular gestures, you recite scripture. There can be free form and spots, face a particular direction, all that stuff. But none of this is empty. You're not doing it right if it's empty. In whatever tradition you're doing that sort of thing. Now, I don't remember the New Testament words for prayer, but there's different words for these things too. But None of it's supposed to be empty repetitions. You don't just sit there in your seat and let someone else pray and not follow along and not, something for attending. I've brought that up in videos, but at this time, Khalil took a deep breath, then lifted his eyes toward Rachel and Miriam, saying, I was saying all of these things to the monks, and they were listening with an air of perplexity, as if they could not believe that a young man would dare stand before them and utter such bold words. When I finished, one of the monks approached and angrily said to me, How dare you talk in such fashion in our presence? And another one came laughing and added, Did you learn all this from the cows and pigs you tended in the fields? And a third one stood up and threatened me, saying, Ye shall be punished, heretic. Then they dispersed, as though running away from a leper. None of them complained to the head priest, who summoned me before him. Some of them complained to the head priest, who summoned me before him at eventide. The monks took delight in anticipation of my suffering, and there was glee on their faces when I was ordered to be scourged and put into prison for 40 days and nights. They led me into the dark cell where I spent the time lying in that grave without seeing the light. I could not tell the end of the night from the beginning of the day, and could feel nothing but crawling insects and the earth under me. I could hear naught save the tramping of the feet when my morsel of bread and dish of water mixed with vinegar were brought to me at great intervals. When I came out of the prison, I was weak and frail, and the monks believed that they had cured me of thinking, and that they killed my soul's desire. They thought that hunger and thirst had choked the kindness which God placed in my heart. In my 40 days of solitude, I endeavored to find a method by which I could help those monks to see the light and hear the true song of life, but all my ponderings were in vain, for the thick veil which the long ages had woven around their eyes could not be torn away in a short time, and the mortar with which ignorance had cemented their ears was hardened and could not be removed by the touch of soft fingers. Silence prevailed for a moment, and then Miriam looked at her mother as if asking her permission to let her talk. She said, You must have talked to the monks again. If they selected this terrible night in which to banish you from the convent, they should learn to be kind even to their enemies. Khalil returned. This evening, as the thunderstorms and roaring elements raged in the sky, I withdrew myself from the monks, who were crouching about the fire, telling tales and humorous stories. When they saw me alone, they commenced to place their wit at my expense. I was reading my gospel and contemplating the beautiful sayings of Jesus that made me forget, for the time, the enraged nature and belligerent elements of the sky. When they approached me with a new spirit of ridicule, I ignored them by occupying myself and looking through the window, but they became furious because my silence dried the laughter of their hearts and the taunting of their lips. One of them said, What are you reading, great reformer? In response to his inquiry, I opened my book and read aloud the following passage. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and the Sadducees come to his baptism, he said unto them, O generation of vipers, who hath warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Bring forth, therefore, fruits for repentance, and think not to say within yourselves, We have Abraham to our father. For I say unto you that God is able of these stones to raise children unto Abraham, and now also the axe is laid unto the root of the trees. Therefore every tree which bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. As I read to them these words of John the Baptist, the monks became silent as if an invisible hand strangled their spirits, but they took false courage and commenced laughing. One of them said, "We have read these words many times, and we are not in need of a cow grazier to repeat them to us." I protested. If you had read these words and comprehended their meaning, these poor villagers would not have frozen or starved to death. When I said this, one of the monks slapped my face as if I had spoken evil of all the priests. Another kicked me, and a third took the book from me, and a fourth one, called the head priest, was hurried to the scene, shaking with anger. He cried out, "Arrest this rebel and drag him from this sacred place, and let the storm's fury teach him obedience. Take him away, and let nature do unto him the will of God, and then wash your hands of the poisonous germs of heresy infesting this raiment. If he should return, pleading for forgiveness, do not open the door for him, for the viper will not become a dove if placed in a cage, nor will the briar bear figs if planted in the vineyards." In accordance with the command, I was dragged out by the laughing monks. Before they locked the door behind me, I heard one saying, "Yesterday you were king of cows and pigs, and today you are dethroned. O great reformer, go now and be the king of wolves and teach them how to live their lives, how to live in their lairs." Khalil sighed deeply, then turned his face and looked toward the flaming fire with a sweet and loving voice, and with a pained countenance. He said, "Thus I was expelled from the convent, and thus did the monks deliver me over to the hands of death."